I'm Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the Federation Starship Enterprise.
A fourth year for a Star Trek show was a big deal in 1990. It had never happened before. Another thing that was a big deal in 1990, people thinking that Do the Bartman would soon mark the end of this Simpsons fad.
Perhaps seeing this will help him understand.
In the 24th century, No One Can Hear You Beam. Star Trek The Next Generation, Season 4.
Your resistance is hopeless.
Some things improve with age. Maybe your trombone playing will be one of them.
Star Trek The Next Generation's third season was where the series went from a disappointing gift from a distant uncle who for some reason keeps calling you Chris, to that shiny new giant 20-inch big screen television you got for Christmas in 1990, complete with a remote control and an AV input, either for your VCR or, well, not much else.
You did not? No, I did not.
Season 4 had a stable writing team that would stick with the series and the franchise through till the end of the decade. Jerry Taylor was an experienced writer who looked after the younger writers on staff, where Brannon Braga came onto the series as an intern and would stick around with the franchise through to the end of Enterprise, a series that he would end up co-creating.
You always thought he was so full of himself.
The last season ended with a cliffhanger written by head writer and co-executive producer Michael Piller, who wrote the first part without knowing if he was going to have to write the conclusion. But as he stayed with the series, he'd now need to write the crew out of the fine mess that he'd gotten them into. The Borg had returned and kidnapped Picard, turning him into a mouthpiece. Enterprise was about to open fire, and then...
fire.
In Part 2, Riker is now acting captain and he's made Shelby his executive officer, while Data got nothing. Nada. Zip. Instead of being the new number one, Data got a big fat 0 for the man whose brain was made of ones and zeros. Data would take being overlooked with fairly good graces, though Commander Shelby would never discover who kept short-sheeting her bed.
Damn.
The Enterprise had to give up chasing the Borg cube, and it was up to a Federation task force to stop the Borg at Wolf 359. When Enterprise finally arrives at the battle zone, it's all over, including the shouting.
But they don't believe anyone can save them.
I'm not sure anyone can.
The score: Borg 1, Starfleet is 0. 39 ships and 11,000 casualties later, the Borg cube is still heading to Earth.
Picard implicitly trusted you.
Then trust me now.
The Enterprise does catch up with the Borg, but their original plan will need changing since Locutus, aka the captain formerly known as Picard, knows absolutely everything about those plans, strategies, weaknesses, and passwords to the Starfleet Netflix account.
If we're lucky, he had access to everything we need to know about them.
A daring raid by Worf and Data manages to recover Locutus. Data manages to interface with Locutus in order to send a simple message to the Borg.
Sleep.
With the Borg taking a little nap, everything is saved. Picard is on the mend, Starfleet will be back up to strength in mere months, and Riker's going to stay where he is, despite the fact that Starfleet has just lost 39 captains and probably could use somebody with a bit of experience.
Number 1.
Best of Both Worlds Part 2 does manage to wrap up the story, but I doubt any conclusion could have been as satisfying dramatically as Part 1 had been.
Fire antimatter spread.
I mean, it's good, it's just not holy shit good when Part 1 was so holy shit good, and you could be forgiven for expecting that Part 2 should be just as holy shit good. This is also one of Riker's finest episodes. Okay, there's not necessarily a surfeit of huge quality Riker episodes in later seasons. In fact, after the first 2 seasons, there are very few big Riker episodes, and out of that base, this is definitely the best one.
Now, how the hell do we defeat an enemy that knows us better than we know ourselves?
Riker and Shelby's rivalry does take a backseat to dealing with the Borg. Riker knows he's going to have to kill Picard to defeat the Borg. I mean, technically, for a sociopath, there would be no choice, since that's just killing 2 birds with 1 stone, getting rid of the Borg and getting an instant pay rise. But Riker is a human, not an asshole. Will Riker is a little hesitant to admit that he has to fill Picard's shoes, but that does not stop him from doing everything possible to defeat the Borg, whether he ends up with that damn promotion or not.
The knowledge and experience of the human. Picard is part of us now.
How cool is the idea of Picard being turned into a Borg? I don't mean he married a Swede. The horror of it is palpable, with his body and personality being taken over by mindless bots, and I don't just mean his Facebook feed.
Bit of a headache.
Of Of course, where I lived, I only got to see the story after both parts had been released as a video rental something like a year or two after it was aired. So this was my very first taste of the third and fourth season version of the series. Man, after being so ambivalent over the first two seasons, I was so hooked. At the time, you would think the show would move on very quickly and just get over this whole Borg assault, where it just ignores the massive hole in Starfleet ranks, whereby Starfleet Academy reunions could now be held in much smaller venues. The after effects of the major ass-kicking the Federation received from the Borg would occasionally pop up as a story point from time to time, whenever somebody wanted to needle Picard or had a grudge against him, or the writers just needed something to hang a movie on.
I'm better.
Even so, even in this era of mostly self-contained episodes, you still needed a smaller show where characters could unpack. So we have family. Picard goes home to his family vineyard in France to recuperate from his injuries. He meets his nephew Rene, his sister-in-law, and his disapproving brother Robert. Now, if you have to have a disapproving brother, always cast Jeremy Kemp. If you thought after the Borg business Picard was just going to go back to business as usual, think again. Picard had his body invaded, violated even, and it would normally take years of therapy for a normal individual to get back on track.
What does it mean anyway? Arrogant son of a...
Let's talk about that later, shall we?
But Picard also has to deal with a brother who's intensely hostile to any technology, for which he blames Jean-Luc. So firstly, Picard has to get over his bodily violation at the hands of the Borg, and then even worse, his brother's massive shoulder-mounted chip. How do you resolve something like that?
Have you two been fighting?
Fighting? No, certainly not.
But add some fisticuffs, ruin a carpet or two, and have the vino flowing freely, and everything's fine. There's no science fiction B-plot, just people interacting with their family. Worf's adopted parents, the Rashenkos, visit the Enterprise, and they'll do what many parents do on such an occasion, tell Worf's friends all of the most embarrassing stories from his childhood.
You agreed not to embarrass him. Besides, we have come to see Worf.
Wesley Crusher gets a message from his long-dead father. Aww. Gene Roddenberry, who by this time was becoming far less involved with the day-to-day running of the series, was still reading scripts, and he did not like the idea of the episode. Not because there were no space battles, but because the Picard brothers were estranged, and in his view, people just wouldn't be so petty in the future.
What the devil happened to you up there?
Is this brotherly concern?
No. Curiosity.
In Brothers, something in Data compels him to commandeer the Enterprise. He outsmarts every security system on the ship and all of its very experienced officers and Lieutenant Worf. With the crew locked out of many of the ship's systems, Data transports down to a planet where he meets his creator, Dr. Noonien Sung, who'd activated a homing system.
Why did you create me?
Why does a painter paint?
He believes he has now perfected an emotion chip for Data. Unfortunately, he's also inadvertently brought back Lore.
Well, until you walked through that door, I had no idea you'd ever been reassembled.
No thanks to you.
The first part of the episode is great, as Data joins a very long list of people who can outsmart the entirety of the brightest lights of the Enterprise crew, and Worf. But the second half is even better, and it's literally just Data, Lore, and Dr. Sung chatting away. Of course, all three are played by Brent Spiner to perfection. Brothers mixes fun, adventure, and a sweetness when the three of them try to mend their various relationships with each other, which of course is not all that easy when one of the brothers is an evil murder bot. Even though Data and Lore are almost identical, you can tell which is which by their demeanour. One of the brothers is quite sour, like if you've just downed several shots of vinegar. Oh, that vinegar's awful. Set me up again. There are lots of invisible effect shots and tricks used to show the brothers and Sung interacting with each other. Originally, veteran actor Key Luke was lined up to play Dr. Sung, but when Spiner read the script, he figured that it would make much more sense for him to play Sung as well. Brent Spiner does manage to make each role distinct, while at the same time making an enormous rod for everybody else's back now that anything related to Sung had to be played by Brent Spiner. Fortunately, he is more than up to the task.
Often wrong Sung. It's a very sloppy rhyme.
Another minor point of interest is that this was the first episode written by the show's executive producer, Rick Berman, which was fairly unusual as to date he'd mainly kept away from the writing side of the show. The subplot of the two brothers having a fight reminds us that there are kids on the Enterprise. It's also a mirror of the Data and Lore relationship. But it also reminds us just how subplots can suck. I once wrote some copy for an ad campaign for a major hamburger restaurant chain that I won't name, but my subplot about extra pickles just ended up on the roof.
So...
In Suddenly Human, Enterprise encounters a human boy raised by aliens who does not want to go home. Beverly discovers traces of wounds and she immediately assumes that these are the results of possible abuse. And, well, it just goes on from there.
Does that custom extend to brutalizing this surrogate son?
Picard seems to be the only person that Jonah responds to and reluctantly tries to get to know the boy and help him rediscover his human side.
You're saying that's what I'm going to have to do?
Yes.
But Jonah just wants to return to his adoptive father, who's also responsible for his parents' death. Geez, that makes for an awkward Father's Day.
I'm not cringing.
Oh, and Jonah's grandmother is a Starfleet high-up. So here's a story where everybody just has to basically suck it up and let the boy return home and hope that his Admiral grandmother isn't vindictive. Otherwise, she might assign the Enterprise crew to cleaning out the septic tanks on Starbase 1.
I don't think that this has anything to do with anything.
Remember Me sees Beverly Crusher as the only person on the Enterprise who can recall Enterprise's rapidly diminishing crew complement.
You're telling me I'm the sole medical officer on a ship with over 1,000 people on board?
But the entire ship's complement is 230.
While Picard takes it all in relatively good humor until he too disappears.
Luke, you and I.
Remember Me is possibly the rarest of next-gen story types. It's a Beverly Crusher story, hear me out, that is good. It's a good story period, and it's probably her best story. Sure, Beverly would discover the wonders of a ghost's nocturnal emissions in later years, but here the character works the problem, even when she and pretty much everyone around her doubts her sanity.
What if it's not some huge conspiracy? What if it is just me?
Dr. Crusher, though, does mostly keep her shit together. There's a brief appearance from the Traveller to help return Beverly from her bubble universe. Yes, Wesley helped save the day, but also, let's not forget, he did get us into this mess. So, yet again, Wesley saves us from himself. Getting trapped in a bubble universe sounds like it could have advantages, as in you wouldn't get half as many nuisance phone calls from scammers, and you also wouldn't have to deal with crowds when you're doing your Christmas shopping. But the downside is the bubble universe will shrink to the point where you no longer exist. So, on balance, I guess there are swings and roundabouts.
That sounds about right.
Legacy is an episode that has no real point. The Enterprise arrives at a planet where the late Tasha Yar had grown up, and it's now divided into groups of factions that fight each other, but for some reason they all have embedded proximity sensors to maintain the status quo. The crew of a downed Federation freighter are being held by one faction, and Enterprise agrees to work with the representatives of another faction.
This is Ishara. Ishara Yar.
One of them turns out to be Tasha Yar's sister, Ishara Yar, or to give her full name, Ishara Laratara Karamara Yar.
You don't believe I'm Tasha's sister?
To say the crew are skeptical of her claim would be an understatement, on the same level as describing the Eiffel Tower as a really big stepladder.
We have considered the possibility.
Like so many workplaces, the Enterprise is no stranger to arguments over what temperature to set the thermostat. Picard likes it set to a very cool 18 degrees Celsius, which does explain why Beverly often wears the coat. Ishara Yar finds it so cold that she has to wear long johns on the bridge. Meanwhile, Data tries to work out whether Ishara Yar is really a Yar or a Yar alike. Ishara Yar seems to be down on her dead sister for deserting their world, but is still curious about her life and her death.
I don't run away when things get tough, like some people.
Ishara is indeed Tasha's sister, but she puts the interests of her faction ahead of her new friendship with Data.
You know, Data, I wasn't always lying to you.
It's a little plotting for the most part when compared to most of the episodes for this season.
The Klingon Empire is at a critical juncture. We may be facing civil war.
Reunion continues the Klingon leadership struggle, but now it's on the Enterprise. The leader of the Empire, Kempek, is dying, and a new leader must be chosen by, of course, the famed Klingon warrior, Jean-Luc Picard. It's got to be Picard for reasons, but of course there'd be no show if pure logic was at play.
It will.
Worf's ex-girlfriend Kayla shows up with her son, Alexander.
Yes.
Surprise! Worf is the baby daddy, but worries if the Klingons know that he's the baby daddy that his son will inherit the baby daddy's discommendation, so he wants to hide the fact that he's the baby daddy. I mean, that's not really an excuse that will wash with the Klingon Child Support Agency, but I digress.
If you cannot be his father, at least be his friend.
Kayla tries to get Worf to talk about why he accepted discommendation, but he's keeping stumm. Now that's a Klingon term meaning to stay silent about such things. Kayla does a little digging, which alerts Duras to the fact that his family is about to be exposed for their treachery.
The son betrays his people to the Romulans, just as his father did.
Shit gets real when Worf's rival Duras kills Kayla, and Worf goes all Charles Bronson in order to take his bloody revenge. You probably didn't see this coming. Because Duras sure didn't. Picard has to dress down an officer whose girlfriend and baby mama has just been killed. But since this is Star Trek The Next Generation, Picard doesn't do much more than express disappointment, which is the highest sanction possible.
A reprimand will appear on your record.
Alexander is packed off to Earth, otherwise every episode would have to recap why Worf suddenly had a son. But Alexander would be back, just played by a different actor. Susie Plaxton had made a positive impression with viewers and fans, but when she was killed off, writer Ron Moore was not prepared for the sort of backlash that he would receive. I sympathise. I remember the time that I accidentally served somebody sweet potato fries instead of French fries, and they are still trying to get the spray paint off the staff entrance. This is where Gowron is introduced, where he'll soon become the leader of the Klingon Empire pretty much by default. He was a character who would appear on and off for the next decade or so of Star Trek television. Robert O'Reilly was an actor who often played heavies on 80s and 90s shows, and Gowron would be the gift for gigging character actors.
But not today.
Somebody who the producers wanted to use again and again, and the thing that got him the job, that wide-eyed look that became Gowron's signature, the look of somebody who's just realised that they've swallowed their car keys. In Future Imperfect, it's Riker's birthday, but rather than eat any more of the gritty cake that Worf had baked for his party, Riker undertakes an away mission where things take a turn because something whiffy is happening. When Riker regains consciousness, he finds out that it's now many years later. Riker is now the captain of the Enterprise with absolutely no memory of the last 16 or so years. Now this happens more often than you think, especially when the absinthe sales rep swings by the bar.
What is that all about?
Everybody looks a little older. Picard is visiting, so is Romulan Ambassador Tomalak. To cap it off, Riker has a son that he has absolutely no memory of, and he's called him Jean-Luc. So naming your son after your boss is certainly a strategy for advancement, which means I'll have to name my kid Scheming Backstabber.
Well, as soon as these negotiations are out of the way, you and I are going fishing.
Great.
Riker tries to put together his missing memories, but something's not quite right. Things take a turn when he finally sees an image of his late wife, and it turns out to be the hologram simulation Minuet from Season 1's episode 01000, this one. Riker manages to pick apart the inconsistencies, just like some tit on YouTube, and he even gets to fulfill a repressed wish.
Beg your pardon. I said shut up!
Oh, so it was a Romulan simulation all along. Then Riker must work with the young prisoner who was his son in the simulation, and wait a minute, it's a simulation within a simulation. It's just a lonely lost child. Oh shucks, what a sweet ending. And then they ruin it with this.
To me, you'll always be Jean-Luc.
It's always fun when the production tried to predict how the cast would look when they're older, giving some people some grey streaks, giving Worf a scar, and sticking Data in a red uniform. Throughout the series, Riker has good episodes and bad episodes, but the really good episodes would become rarer than a DeLorean owner that has never seen Back to the Future. Future Imperfect, though, is a solid episode that ends the run of stories where most of the season so far revolved around the theme of family. Dr. Crusher is finally given an assistant, with Patty Yasutaki making her first appearance as recurring character Nurse Alyssa Ogawa.
I was just attempting to offer an
Because I
explanation.
can assure you that will not go down well at Starfleet Academy.
Yes, sir, I'm aware of that.
In the final mission, Wesley is off to the Academy, so why not go on, some sort of final mission? Wesley and Picard take a ride on a mining shuttle with Captain Durgo, and wouldn't you know it, things don't go so well. They crash on an arid planet, find a cave with a water spout, but one that's defended by something. Durgo is not a great fella to have around in a survival situation, and he's soon turned into a statue of somebody who regrets far too late certain choices. Picard is injured, and well, it's up to Wesley to save the day.
What are you doing in such a filthy uniform?
You don't look so ship-shape yourself, sir.
Teaming Wesley and Picard would work out quite well the few times they did it in Star Trek The Next Generation.
I envy you, Wesley Crusher.
But behind the scenes, Will Wheaton had grown frustrated with the role of Wesley over the previous year, where the show's massive leap in quality did not carry over to roles for Wesley. He had by this time become a fairly minor supporting character. Wheaton says he lost fairly good movie roles as a result of producers intransigence and giving him some time off, and at the same time, their character was mostly benched. So, Wesley Crusher more or less leaves his regular role behind with this story,
But it didn't turn out the way that I thought.
though he would make several returns as a guest. Wheaton sorta regretted his move, but I can totally sympathise with leaving a very unhappy work situation, even one that sounds like a complete dream to many. His final episode as a regular was also by far one of the better Wesley stories, and maybe for those viewers whose antipathy towards Wesley had reached breaking point, this is the light at the end of the tunnel. That is a bit much, but whatever.
Yes.
Lastly, Nick Tate from Space 1999 makes a very welcome appearance as the difficult pilot Durgo.
My ship isn't pretty. She isn't big. But we've logged almost 10,000 hours together.
In The Loss, Troi loses her empathy. I don't care. Without her empathy, she's at a loose end. Rather than do what other people with no empathy do and post hateful comments on social media, Troi starts to fall apart, snapping at people, and she's annoyed at how she perceives people are now treating her.
I wouldn't have been in here treating skinned elbows while you were lying passed out on your office floor.
As an episode dealing with a character's sudden disability, it is a bit on the nose, but as it's Star Trek in the 90s, it has to be a totally non-disfiguring disability.
With all due respect, Captain, you don't know what you're talking about.
But it is nice to see our characters finally just not in a good state, with there being some actual interpersonal conflict here as Troi goes off on Beverly, while Riker will read her the riot act.
I'd always thought there was something a little too aristocratic about your Betazoid heritage.
Picard also goes looking for something that isn't there. The ship has been snared by a colony of two-dimensional creatures on course for a cosmic string, which is also something that is rather flat. When both ship and 2D creatures hit the string, it's not going to be good for anyone. Deanna has to try and work out a way to communicate with the creatures in time to save the ship, but without her abilities. A cosmic string is a theoretical one-dimensional defect in space, while Cosmic Thing by the B-52s is empirically a bop. The 2D creatures are saved, so is the ship, and Deanna's abilities return, which I suppose is nice. It is one of those episodes that I used to not like, but it does have a few positives. It gives Marina Sirtis a chance to push herself in showing Troi on a really bad day, where she's being a bit of a diva. Troi, without her empathic abilities, seemed to show that every other bit of study she did in training to be a counselor was in fact a complete and utter waste of time. But you adapt. I mean, I don't have the ability to shoot flames from my fingers, yet I can quite easily start a fire in the stationery cupboard. This episode also asks the question, why would any non-Betazoid bother to train to be a counselor if the Betazoids have that market all sewn up with their empathy cartel? Of course, you don't need a Betazoid's empathic abilities to feel empathy, unless of course you're Deanna Troi. But ever since Guinan popped up on the ship, she's often proven to be a far more effective counselor than Troi. When Guinan needles Troi about replacing her,
It would be nice to have a nice office too.
Deanna is going to need to go to sickbay to get treatment for a really bad burn.
Here for a trim? My hair does not require trimming, you lunkhead.
Lunkhead?
I am experimenting with friendly jibes and insults.
Data's Day is one of the more unique episodes in the entire series. It's narrated by Data as if it were a message to Dr. Bruce Maddox, who had once tried to have Data treated as Federation property. Data being Data, he's clearly let bygones be bygones and is logging a typical day in his life, except here, Data is also supposed to be giving away botanist Keiko as she ums and ahs about her impending marriage to Miles O'Brien.
I have good news. Oh, she has canceled the wedding.
She what?
There's a small subplot about Romulans using the Federation to inadvertently return a spy.
However, the mission must proceed as planned.
The Romulan spy attempts to throw off suspicion by wearing a Pikmin balaclava that she's bought on Etsy. But the highlight is Data taking dance lessons from Dr. Crusher. Gates McFadden, who had worked quite a bit as a choreographer, plays Dr. Crusher teaching Data how to cut a rug or to trip the light fantastic, none of which is as painful as it sounds.
I am now prepared to dance at the wedding.
Wedding?
Rosalind Chow, who popped up at the very end of MASH, joins the Trek family, where she'll of course eventually follow Colm Meaney over to Deep Space Nine.
I am attempting to calculate the variables involved in a successful marriage.
Good luck.
It's a really good, solid episode concentrating on life on board the Enterprise, mixing a bit of comedy, the pre-wedding jitters, a little bit of espionage when the Vulcan diplomat turns out to be a Romulan spy, all tied together with Brent Spiner's narration.
No, don't be nervous.
I am not nervous. I am confused.
In The Wounded, the Cardassians enter the picture. Federation officer Captain Maxwell has gone rogue and is attacking Cardassian vessels, who, Cardassians, the Cardassians. Well, the Cardassians and the Federation were, until recently, engaged in a war that's never once been mentioned by anybody in the entire series. Newlywed Miles O'Brien decides to test his marriage by offering to one-up his wife's unpalatable breakfast menu with one that's equally stomach-turning. He had, quite coincidentally of course, if conveniently, served in the Federation Cardassian War as a tactical officer to the rogue captain. I mean, that's a stroke of luck.
It's not you I hate, Cardassian. I hate what I became.
these Cardassians in their first appearance would look a little different than the look that we'd see later on, and particularly in Deep Space Nine. But for this season's fashion-forward Cardassian warrior, brown is the new grey. And of course, they're clearly in that phase where they vinyl wrapped everything like it's a 2011 Ford Focus.
I'm not sure I would be so generous in your place, Captain.
Here is a rare episode where the main cast are not the focus of the show, nor is it all about the guest star, but instead the backbone of the episode is a relatively minor recurring character who's only just inherited much of any backstory. This is a Miles O'Brien episode, and it's an opportunity that Colomini grabbed with both hands. A big part of the story is O'Brien learning to let go of old enmity from his war experiences. O'Brien gets to tell war stories and sing old songs, and he gets to be the hero by talking down his former captain. There will be a few episodes here and there with more O'Brien, but you O'Brien superfans will have to wait until Deep Space Nine to see his life ripped apart every 3 weeks. Mark Alaimo was another actor who often played heavies in TV of the time. He played the first Cardassian Gull here and would later join Deep Space Nine's Rogues Gallery as Gul Dukat. The episode ends with Picard doing one of his player moves. You know, that's a good power swivel.
And stop cowering. When I want you on your knees, I'll let you know. Much better.
In Devil's Due, a planet is going nuts as a prophecy seems to be coming true. 1,000 years of peace and prosperity will end as the mythical Ardra returns to claim the planet. Devil's Due is a story about big ideas, but one that does manage to convey them relatively simply, as most of it's done with a shaking camera or some makeup effects, and an awful lot of it is set in a courtroom or a lobby of a La Quinta Inn. Picard feels certain that Ardra is a grifter and challenges her claims, while Data has to function as an impartial adjudicator.
The advocate will refrain from making her opponent disappear.
The war of wills between Picard and Ardra has an extra dimension when she at first tries to seduce Picard and later will claim him as her prize. Seeing Picard uncomfortable is always fun.
I have intrigued you, haven't I, Picard?
Marta Dubois, who in the 80s had been a regular on Tales of the Gold Monkey and had also played the dead but not dead but dead Mrs. Thomas Magnum. She seems to be having a lot of fun playing a con artist, while Patrick Stewart trying to use vernacular as Picard always sounds like Anthony Hopkins reading an audiobook version of Deep Throat.
I've been examining the dynamics of what used to be called the con game.
Devil's Due is a fun episode, but it's curiously one that could have easily been an original series episode. And there's a reason for that, since this was based on a script originally written for the abortive late 70s Phase 2 series.
It is our job to out-con the con artist.
I will just say that out of the standalone episodes in a very strong season, I do like this one a little more than most. It is, of course, slightly hard to believe that Ardra can block communications from the Enterprise, or more accurately, it's incredibly disturbing for Starfleet if some random con artist has the tech to do this.
Our crew have admitted that she is known by 23 aliases in this sector alone.
You had no right.
Here's an episode that's watchable, mainly because its obvious stupidity will make even Ready Player One feel like a work of genius.
Not too bad, all things considered.
There's a mystery when it looks like the crew have lost a day with no one able to account for what happened, apart from Data, who appears to be concealing something on pain of death.
I looked into the mirror. It wasn't me, Worf.
How did Worf injure himself?
How did this happen?
How come some of Dr. Crusher's experiments have exhibited more growth than they should have? Why is Data willing to lie about what's going on?
What happened to us during that missing day? Surely there must be some clues.
Like I said, Clues is watchable but dumb, like watching a special episode of American Ninja where all of the contestants are penguins. Enterprise has encroached on some alien space, and rather than destroy the Enterprise, Picard has agreed to have everybody's memories wiped of the last day. Then of course all of that unravels and they have to do the whole thing again. Of course there's a very laboured explanation that totally wraps up everything like a toddler wrapping up a Mother's Day gift. I mean, it does the job, but it is hardly elegant.
Explains why our beards didn't grow.
Clues briefly returns us to Picard's Dixon Hill holonovel, this time with Guinan tagging along. The rest of the episode shows everybody attempting to retrace their steps. It feels about as lively as a hibernating bear who's washed down a couple of sleeping tablets with NyQuil.
If that's the good news, what's the bad news?
Being able to wipe the last 24 hours of your memory sounds like it would have its uses, but let's not argue as though we don't already have that technology to wipe out memory today. You only need to mix 2 liquids, gin and tonic water in sufficient quantities, and hey presto, what was I saying?
Dr. Crusher's incubation experiment, computer clock, transporter trace, all indicate the existence of a missing day.
Don't let the number of writers credited with this one episode fool you. It's a great episode, starting in a hospital on an alien world where an emergency patient turns out to be a heavily injured Riker.
Your cranial lobes seem to be surgical implants.
I had cosmetic surgery.
This is a planet on the cusp of successfully using warp power, but isn't quite there socially. Poor Picard finds he has to make first contact ahead of schedule, since he needs to find some local help to get Riker back. The main thrust of the story is about the locals freaking out when they realise that they are no longer at the top of the tree. They're freaking out when they're confronted with an alien, though one of them just wants to bang Riker.
What?
I've always wanted to make love with an alien.
Carolyn Seymour showed her versatility as an alien scientist Marasta, and Cheers star Bebe Neuwirth shows up for a few scenes as the horny alien.
Will I ever see you again?
Apart from a matte shot or two, this episode has few special effects, but does have a heavy load for the makeup department, who have to provide various bits and bobs for the guest cast. It's a standalone with no ramifications on other stories, but it's a really solid show of the week. It is perhaps a little diluted by the likes of the xenophobic security chief winning, as he manages to stop any further contact with the Federation.
You still represent the end to my way of life.
The show did miss a trick by not bringing back Marasta, but at the very least they did use Carolyn Seymour again.
And then, Krolla, we'll see what's there.
Jonathan Frakes' character was the subject of the episode. But guess what? It's really a Patrick Stewart episode where he interacts with George Coe and Carolyn Seymour. First Contact is just a really solid episode that gives us a nice look at first contact procedures, but mainly from the perspective of when it goes just a bit wrong. As depicted here, First Contact does seem like preparing to meet your new neighbours by first breaking into their house and reading their diaries before you introduce yourself a month later.
All the other aliens are waiting for me.
In Galaxy's Child, Geordi is excited for a visit by Dr. Leah Brahms, the ship designer that Geordi had recreated on the holodeck in the previous year's episode, Booby Trap.
Every time you touch it, it's me.
Here, Dr. Brahms is at first a little standoffish, while Geordi plays the long game and pulls out all of his best moves. Except Dr. Brahms is no dummy and quickly makes her excuses.
To top it all off, she's married.
The main sci-fi plot of the Enterprise encountering a creature in space and then inadvertently killing it is fairly slight, though Picard's dismay over the responsibility for the creature's death is palpable. Though, of course, Patrick Stewart could make reading the instructions on the back of dog heartwarming tablets into a BAFTA-winning performance. Dr. Brahms happens upon Geordi's holodeck recreation of her.
Every time you touch it, it's me.
And Geordi has the look of somebody who's just realised that his porn collection has just been discovered.
Every time you're touching the engine, you're touching me, real professional.
Galaxy's Child is an episode where you appreciate how the A story is just Geordi meeting the object of his fantasy, and things just not going the way he wanted.
But when it came to the relationship, LaForge, you filled in the blanks.
They do salvage their relationship by working together to nurture the child of the space creature from earlier.
I don't even think this has ever even been conceived of before.
It's just another good episode. My, are we being spoiled this season? I mean, nothing's going to stop the momentum of this run of good to great stories from week to week. Nothing. Apart from this.
We have to get the Enterprise away from here before it gets any worse.
In Night Terrors, the Enterprise becomes stuck in an anomaly.
You mean a Titan's Rift?
The Enterprise crew start to become tetchy and hallucinate when it appears that nobody's getting a good night's sleep.
We will all go insane.
While they've encountered a Federation vessel with everybody dead apart from a Betazoid who's half mad. Meanwhile, Deanna Troi has visions where she's flying in space.
All I have is nightmares.
The crew find that they'll need to generate a very large explosion to free themselves without destroying the ship. Troi, of course, eventually works out that her visions are a message from another trapped vessel who need hydrogen. And, well, unlike the crew, I did have a really good sleep, thanks for asking.
As my final duty as acting captain, I order you to bed.
It's not a great story, but maybe it's good because at this point in the show's history, they are still making efforts to give everybody featured episodes every season.
They're calling for help. I think they're trapped, just like we are.
Night Terrors, however, is very much a lesser episode, one that you only remember when you think of bad episodes. It's probably just a little bit more watchable than that implies, but apparently sleep disorders would be one of the most pitched concepts that the writing staff would listen to. There's a slight tinge of horror to spice things up, but overall it's fairly lacking and there's not a lot of charm. Honestly, and appropriately enough, it's a bit of a yawn.
I've had similar feelings.
In Identity Crisis, Geordi and an old colleague and friend, Susanna, are the last two remaining members of a survey mission from years earlier, and everyone else has gone rogue, going to any lengths to return to this planet. All signs point to Geordi and Susanna being next.
You can feel it. They're here.
It's a solid episode from the era when it wasn't unusual to see Geordi having decent to good episodes, and it's not even a big deal because Geordi is awesome, so let's give him a good story.
Can you extrapolate each officer's movements as they walk out of the recording device's field of view?
Recreating an old recording on the holodeck leads Geordi to believe his former colleagues are still there, they're just not visible, which is like what happens when human resources suddenly taps you on the shoulder. Identity Crisis is a story that only works because when it was made, in the 4th season. If this story had been attempted in the first year, chances are we wouldn't have cared anywhere near as much. But by now, Geordi's been allowed to have a life and viewers have grown attached to him.
There.
Reg Barkley returns in the nth degree. Reg is doing much better these days, but something happens when an alien probe scans him. All of a sudden, Reg is supremely confident and his intelligence has leapfrogged everybody else on the Enterprise, and Commander Riker.
Naturally created an amplification of the inherent energy output.
See that?
When Reg's showboating becomes too much for the senior staff to bear, things take a turn when Reg hooks himself up to the Enterprise computer. Reg can't be disconnected, but it's all good, there's no malice, it's just some aliens who use Reg to improve the Enterprise just enough so they can visit their planet for an information exchange.
Checkmate in 9 moves.
I didn't know you played chess.
I don't.
Oh, and the hologram Einstein is actor Jim Norton in the first of 2 appearances in the show. Norton is best known to some, well at least me, as Bishop Len Brennan, and at no stage does he get kicked up the arse.
He did make a pass at me last night. A good one.
Cupid is a comedy episode, a Q episode, a Vash episode, a Valentine's Day episode, an episode where Troi and Crusher give some people horrendous brain injuries by smashing ceramic pots on their head.
And what is it you want?
Do I always have to have a reason to stop by?
Q wants to repay Picard for saving his life and instead does whatever this is. John Delancey is the Sheriff of Nottingham, Jennifer Hetrick returns as Vash, and Picard is Robin Hood. Riker is Little John, Geordi is Alan Dale, Data is Friar Tuck, and Worf Will Scarlet. Meanwhile, Troi and Crusher are just 2 hitchhikers they picked up at the Shell at Forest Fields.
I protest. I am not a merry man.
It is fun and silly, though Worf does steal the episode with his displeasure.
Sorry.
Q and Vash will run off together, leaving Picard to go back to being closed off and isolated. Picard's discomfort at having his love life being so openly discussed is palpable.
This is Beverly. Dr. Beverly. Dr. Beverly Crusher. This is Vash.
The Robin Hood stuff is played for laughs, but it's also a bit of a hoot. But hey, that is the good thing about a Q episode. You can do a story like this without visiting a planet with parallel development, or muck about with time travel, or set it on a malfunctioning holodeck.
I may not show my feelings to my crew, but I do have them.
In the drumhead, a Klingon spy is uncovered at the same time as an explosion in engineering. Retired Admiral Sirtis is assigned to investigate, and Picard is only too happy to cooperate, until it becomes apparent that Sirtis has fallen into the well of paranoid conspiracy theories. A medic who lied on his Starfleet application is the Admiral's chief suspect, but Picard has to try and keep things in check when the Admiral starts getting legal advice from Facebook.
Do what you must, Captain. And so will I.
Gene Simmons puts in a good guest performance, where she clearly relishes mispronouncing everybody's name.
One wonders how you can sleep at night, having caused so much destruction.
Her attempts to uncover a conspiracy start to fall apart when the explosion proves to be an accident, and also it's coming up to the 40-minute mark, so we better wrap this up and never mention any of this again. It is an episode that shows you don't really need a lot of special effects just to be special.
Spreading fear in the name of righteousness.
Half a Life is a Lwaxana story, and so it starts off being all amusing, watching Picard's discomfort at being around Lwaxana while he's dealing with a visiting alien scientist from an isolated planet. Lwaxana hits it off with the quietly spoken Timmerson, and it's all going well between the two until he reveals he's heading home soon to die. That's what you do on this planet when you hit 60. On his planet, 60 is not the new 40 but the new 0. It's a tearjerker as Lwaxana and Timmerson fall in love, debate the rights and wrongs of his culture.
I will say it again, you are a kind woman.
David Ogden Stiers guest stars, where he was still well known from appearing in MASH. His daughter was played by guest artist Michelle Forbes, who would impress the producers enough to be offered a recurring role as Ensign Ro the following season. Though, as to why she's dressed like an electric scooter, we may never know.
What you're really saying is you got rid of the problem by getting rid of the people.
Beverly is having a quiet romance with Ambassador O'Darn. She's glowing and people around her slowly twig one by one, or shift in their seats, or adjust their collars to try and hide their reactions.
Yes, I'm sure that's true.
O'Darn is a Trill, which at this time meant absolutely nothing to Star Trek fans, but they would become a major part of Deep Space Nine, where of course they'd go through a major retcon. O'Darn is injured, and we learn the fact that O'Darn has a slug in his body who is his actual personality that Beverly had fallen in love with. This is of course a revelation to Beverly and the crew in general. Of course, by the time we'd get to Deep Space Nine, the Trills would be spotty rather than bumpy, and their symbiotic nature would be common knowledge, like Ferengi greed or Vulcan stoicism. O'Darn is briefly hosted by Riker. By hosted, we don't just mean he's couch surfing in Riker's quarters, but he's residing in Commander Riker for a time. Beverly resists for a little time, but she eventually decides Riker is O'Darn enough. Why Riker? Well, because he volunteered, but realistically it's not as though Riker had much else going on at this time.
I feel his pull, it's very powerful.
O'Darn/Riker managed to finish their important peace negotiations, but Riker will die if the slug stays any longer than is necessary. When the replacement host turns up, oh boy, it's a woman.
And yes, I am still O'Darn, and I still love you.
At this point, Beverly finds the idea of hooking up with a woman to be a bridge too far. Of course, a few years later in Deep Space Nine, that gender barrier would just be flat out ignored. On the other hand, if O'Darn had died and returned to haunt Beverly as a gaseous green ghost, then perhaps there would have been a chance for the pair.
What?
But Beverly Crusher is quite clear that if she ever accidentally clicked on a girl-girl holodeck program, that she wouldn't hang around for more than an hour. 90 minutes tops.
Hi, what can I do for you?
In the mind's eye, Geordi is captured by Romulans on the way to a conference and brainwashed. He's sent back to the Enterprise just as Picard is trying to defuse a situation with a Klingon colony. Star Trek, or any television riffing on a popular movie, was not all that unusual, and neither was using the Manchurian Candidate as inspiration.
Now what did I ask you to do?
Kill Chief O'Brien.
A good Geordi episode is a phrase we've used a few times in this video, but it will be used far less in future looks at Next Generation seasons. Here, Geordi is a programmed killer who doesn't know it. It is a nice showcase for Levar Burton.
Take Commander LaForge into custody immediately.
Sir.
That is an order.
Of course, it is Data who manages to piece it all together. Look, if you have a difficult Lego to put together, Data's the guy you need. If you have a 3D puzzle that's flummoxing you, then again, call Data. However, if you're playing Twister, decline politely, because he might just snap your neck.
It did happen! I remember being on Ryza.
A phaser rifle appears in the Next Generation for the first time, and it has all the ergonomics of a can opener built into the underside of a can of beans. Also, John Fleck would be one of those actors that Trek loved to use in various roles, including Silic on Enterprise.
Lieutenant Desora just gave me what could be considered a very passionate kiss in the torpedo bay.
In theory, is a quiet, small episode just before the big end of season blowout. Data and Jenna embark on a romance, which is as good an excuse as any to watch Brent Spiner in action.
Commander Riker suggested this particular flower. He said it had worked for him in the past.
Data extrapolates from all of his observations on how to act in a relationship, with some odd and amusing results. He's a blank slate in this regard, so he has to do research and run algorithms.
Why can't I fall for somebody like you? You're perfect.
Now you might think an episode about a Roomba trying to seduce somebody might be dull and dry, but it's a cute episode that has a minor B story about the Enterprise moving through distortions that leave the Enterprise feeling less solid than usual. Michelle Scarabelli had been in the final season of Airwolf and the short-lived Alien Nation series. Here she's Data's girlfriend, who wants the perfect man, but she'll eventually realise that he's been getting his ideas about how to behave in a relationship from some rather odd sources.
You don't tell me how to behave. You're not my mother.
What?
That is the appropriate response for your statement that I am behaving foolishly.
Picard again has to use his piloting skills to lead the Enterprise to safety at the end. It's silly, and the justification is,
because I said so. I believe our best chance of escaping this situation is for me to pilot the shuttle. It's my ship, Will.
I've got to do this.
This probably marks one of the last vestiges of Riker being anything other than a battery backup captain.
I am not a traitor.
The season comes to a climax with redemption, where Worf becomes a linchpin of Klingon politics. Gowron is set to become the Chancellor of the Klingon Empire when all of a sudden a challenger appears. Toral is apparently the son of Duras. It's assumed that he's being guided by his aunts, Auntie Lursa and Auntie Bator. Or is that Auntie Lursa and Auntie Bator? Anyway, these women are the brains of the Duras family, while Toral is the Titan sphincter.
It will mean the end of the alliance with the Federation.
Oh, we would hate to see that happen as much as you would.
The Klingon Empire splinters into civil war, with people lining up behind the House of Duras and the stragglers sticking with Gowron. Worf offers his support to Gowron and that of his brother Kern and their allies, for the low price of restoring honour to the House of Moog. Worf's Klingon honour does seem to be horse-traded as if it was a certificate of authenticity for a screen-used lollipop from Kojak. Worf has to make a choice, stay in Starfleet or support Gowron in the Civil War.
Then I resign my commission as a Starfleet officer.
Worf is then given an honour guard to the transporter room. Thankfully for the show's budget, the honour guard extends from the turbo lift and not Worf's quarters. Nobody apparently wanted quarters near the transporter room. I mean, usually it's very quiet. Unless, of course, something goes wrong, in which case the screams will haunt you for the rest of your days.
Let your name be spoken once again. You are Worf.
Occasionally we had seen teasers of Klingons working with a shadowy, nameless Romulan, and one was shadowier than any other, but she now, of course, comes out of the shadows. Oh, it's Denise Crosby. What a twist of lemon.
And humans have a way of showing up when you least expect them.
But of course we won't get to know her name until next season. Spoilers, her name is Sela. But as for the reason, you'll have to wait until next season.
You hungry?
So the 4th season was one of the greatest, most consistent seasons of Star Trek ever. There are still a few clunkers.
Acknowledging my limitations.
But most of it is still very highly watchable. Early in Season 4, The Next Generation had beaten the original series in terms of the number of episodes produced. The hoodoo over referencing events and characters from the original series had been broken, and by the 4th season, you didn't really need it because The Next Generation now had enough of its own history to draw upon. Season 5 would, for the most part, continue the run of interesting, exciting, fun, and very good to great stories. So I suppose we'll see you then.
Yes, okay. I have all the specs and diagrams at home.
If you enjoyed this review, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos.
Am I not behaving as a solicitous mate?